identification of resolution or failure of resolution to the crescent of conflict. George Mitchell is quoted recently to have said, "I believe there is no such thing as a conflict that can't be ended. They are created and sustained by human beings. They can be ended by human beings. No matter how ancient the conflict, no matter how hateful, no matter how hurtful, peace can prevail." A very nice saying. He may be right in principle. But as John Maynard Keynes said, in the long run, we are all dead. Right? And he said it to exactly similar kind of after every crisis there is a boom or whatever, right? So Mitchell is right in principle. No human situation is forever. However, it doesn't follow that peace can be gotten at any time. Existing impediments to peace may foil any specific peace initiative. Right conditions must be created for efforts to be successful, and if conditions are not right, a will is not enough. So, to start on this question of tractability, my feeling and my analysis is that I find it hard to believe that there's going to be a breakthrough in the Israeli-Arab conflict soon. But I'm more than willing to eat my hat if this happens. And what we have to see is here the difference between the world that Bush, the father, inherited in 1990 and the world and the place of America in the world as it is today. At that time, it seemed to be the beginning of what was called the American century. I don't think that there will be many who would predict the American century in 2010. And that shows how fast things can change. A century in a decade. And Obama finds himself in a very old situation, in an economic crisis, outstretched, in wars, never-ending wars, at least the way that it was defined by the Bush administration. And what we come up to now is the limits, even the limits of American power. Now, when I come to characterize the Israeli-Palestinian and the Israeli-Arab conflict, especially if you bear in mind your own conflict, it has three special characteristics which exist to a much lesser degree in your conflict. And that is the permanent violence of the conflict. There's hardly any other major conflict that I can think of that has so many violent eruptions over such a long time. And the violent eruptions on the large scale do not sum up the daily violence that occurs and becomes part of daily routine in that part of the world. So it's a highly intensive, violent conflict in a very volatile and central area to the economy and to the security of the world, which which makes it even more acute than had it been somewhere else. The second characteristic which is different, and that's the holiness, or the dimension of holiness that is added to the conflict. What I mean by this is that because of the centrality of the Holy Land to three world religions, its relevance far exceeds its locus, and it is central to world concern and attention all the time. I don't know if I've given this example once before. Jerusalem, so writes a famous Israeli poet, Avishai, is a place, in one of his poems, is a place where everyone remembers that they forgot something there. All right? Jerusalem is a mythical name. It has a reality that far exceeds any kind of material. Again, I'll give an example. I was once in Wales in a godforsaken place in a bed and breakfast. And the woman there, the old woman, had a guest book. And she asked us to write where we're from and say something. And we wrote Jerusalem. She looked at it and she says, "Does it really exist?" We said, "Yes, we come from there. We'll send you a picture." And then she says, "In the Garden of Eden too?" But that sounds to some extent, the mythical aspect of the place. Everyone remembers that they had something there, or that they had something there, or whatever. And I could say much more about this, you see. Because in the Bible it says the truth will come out of Zion. So whoever owns Zion has the truth, the true religion, and so on. And that makes the conflict by far more combustive than any other conflict. It makes it more conflict, more absolute, more difficult to resolve. And the third aspect, which is special to that conflict, is that it has many actors, too many actors, too many cooks with fingers in the soup, and as the sentence says, spoil the soup. Which means that very few of them, if any, can resolve the conflict, but it doesn't take much to spoil the efforts of others to resolve the conflict. And that works also to the detriment of some of the people who are the main characters in the conflict. Now, let me start with this. You see, when we say that there are too many actors, it stems out of various reasons. One is that in almost every conflict, you'll find that those involved in the conflict seek alliances. Most common alliances would be, at least at the time of a bipolar world, would be to align themselves to a superpower. And then the superpowers will contest that conflict, and the conflict will be subsumed within the bipolar world and its kind of structure, and between the bigger conflict, what used to be called the Cold War. Just to remind you, the Cold War was called maybe Europe and America, but it was very hot in the Middle East. And it also meant that the superpowers were involved by proxy, by transfer of finance, by transfer of arms, by the way in which they interfered or interceded on behalf of one or the other side in various international institutions and organizations, mainly in the UN, but not just there. Right? So that's one level of seeking alliance. But there is another aspect to it, and that is that both Israeli nationalism, or as it is known, Zionism, and the Palestinian national movements, both of them are pan-movements. Pan-American, you speak Greek, so you know what I'm talking about. Zionism is not the idea of securing independence to a people who sit in a certain territory. It's an idea of taking out people who were minorities in different places and concentrating them in one place where it was hope, now it is a reality, they are a majority. But in that respect, and it differs from other nationalisms, because most other nationalisms, even if they have populations outside of the state, what they would like is the territories to be adjacent or attached or annexed to that state. Right? So enosis was an idea that Cyprus and Greece would become one. Right? This is not the case. This is a different twist to the idea of pan. And the pan means also that that nationalism claims to represent all Jews wherever they are, and to be the state of all Jews. And it's enshrined also in some of its basic laws, in the laws of becoming a citizen, the law of return, which grants almost automatic citizenship to a Jew upon coming or residing in Israel. In return, Zionism claims to represent all Jews, and since after the Second World War, were its main opponents within Judaism, the Orthodoxy and the Jewish socialist movement, the Bund, became extinct, it does gain the affinity of majority of Jews elsewhere. And it organizes those Jews for the interest of the Israeli state. It has chapters, youth movements, organizations, lobbies, most famous the American Jewish lobby, right, which works to mobilize support for Israel in other countries. The Jewish lobby is not just Jewish in the United States. It's a conglomeration of different groups, many of them Christian, many of them fundamentalist Christians, who for various reasons try to articulate American policies in the direction of support of Israel. There is another level of support that Israel gets, and that exhibited itself mainly in 1947-8, and that it brought the creation of the State of Israel, and that is the aftermath of the Holocaust. If one looks at the vote in November 47, which partitioned Palestine in the General Assembly, there was a very interesting division there. All the Arab and Muslim countries voted against, and all countries where there was Christian majority voted for, including communist countries. And Gromyko, who was then the representative of the USSR, spoke very eloquently about the suffering of the Jews. I'm saying this because the issue of Holocaust has become an issue between Iran and Israel about, and I will say my personal view, that Yes, there was a Holocaust, but the Palestinians are not responsible for the Holocaust. But in a way, they're paying what Europeans did to Jews, either as perpetrators or as bystanders or because of the indifference and so on. Having said that, it doesn't mean that sort of we can turn the clock back, because the Holocaust happened. But what I'm saying is that maybe Israel would not have been founded because of the Holocaust. That many of the Jews who have emigrated to Israel between the rise of Hitler to power in 1939 more than doubled the number of Jews in Palestine within 6 years and created the critical mass for state building and so on. So this kind of solidarity is something that Israel relies on, uses. One wants to use the derogatory, manipulates. And you can see this very much also within the EU. There is no common EU policy towards the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. If I want to give an example, something that happened last week, about the vote about the Goldstone report, right? Then Slovakia and Hungary and Italy voted against accepting the Goldstone report, and other EU countries abstained, and Britain and France were not present. So that's for the EU just last week, but common policy. Right? Palestinians also are a pan-movement. First of all, Palestinians, like Jews, have become, after 1948, a diasporic nation. And they live not just inside Israel or in territories occupied by Israel. They live in several other Arab states. In one they are a majority, Jordan, right? They live outside of the Arab states. And in that respect, they also try to mobilize support from other states around. In this, they rely on two movements. First of all, the Pan-Arab movement. Pan-Arab movement was a secular movement that defined anyone who speaks Arabic and is part of the Arab culture, regardless of religion, as an Arab. In other words, you could be a Christian Arab, you could be an Arab Jew. All right? But it saw all Arabs as belonging to one big nationalism, and the hope was that there should be one big Arab state. Never came into being. But that was the ideals of Nasserism, of Baathism in Syria and Iraq and so on. Just to remind you, the Cold War was called maybe Europe and America, but it was very hot in the Middle East. And it also meant that the superpowers were involved by proxy, by transfer of finance, by transfer of arms, by the way in which they interfered or interceded on behalf of one or the other side in various international institutions and organizations, mainly the UN, but not just them. Right? So that's one level of seeking alliance. But there is another aspect to it, and that is that both Israeli nationalism, or as it is known, Zionism, and the Palestinian national movements, both of them are pan-movements. Pan-American, yeah, you speak Greek, so you know what I'm talking about. Zionism is not the idea of securing independence to a people who sit in a certain territory. It's an idea of taking out people who were minorities in different places and concentrating them in one place where it was hoped, now it is a reality, they are a majority. But in that respect, and it differs from other nationalisms, because most other nationalisms, even if they have populations outside of the state, what they would like is the territories to be adjacent or attached or next to that state. Right? So enosis was an idea that Cyprus and Greece would become one. Right? This is not the case. This is a different twist to the idea of pan. And the pan means also that that nationalism claims to represent all Jews wherever they are, and to be the state of all Jews. And it's enshrined also in some of its basic laws, in the laws of becoming a citizen, the law of return, which grants almost automatic citizenship to a Jew upon coming or residing in Israel. In return, Zionism claims to represent all Jews, and since after the Second World War were its main opponents within Judaism, the Orthodoxy and the Jewish socialist movement, the Bund, became extinct, it does gain the affinity of majority of Jews elsewhere. And it organizes those Jews for the interest of the Israeli state. It has chapters, youth movements, organizations, lobbies, most famous the American Jewish lobby, right, which works to mobilize support for Israel in other countries. The Jewish lobby is not just Jewish in the United States. It's a conglomeration of different groups, many of them Christian, many of them fundamentalist Christians, who for various reasons try to articulate American policies in the direction of support of Israel. There is another level of support that Israel gets, and that exhibited itself mainly in 1947-8, and that it brought the creation of the State of Israel, and that is the aftermath of the Holocaust. If one looks at the vote in November 47, which partitioned Palestine in the General Assembly, there was a very interesting division there. All the Arab and Muslim countries voted against, and all countries where there was Christian majority voted for, including communist countries. And Gromyko, who was then the representative of the USSR, spoke very eloquently about the suffering of the Jews. I'm saying this because the issue of Holocaust has become an issue between Iran and Israel about, and I will say my personal view, that yes, there was a Holocaust, but the Palestinians are not responsible for the Holocaust. But in a way, they're paying what Europeans did to Jews, either as perpetrators or as bystanders, or because of the indifference and so on. Having said that, it doesn't mean that sort of we can turn the clock back, because the Holocaust happened. But what I'm saying is that maybe Israel would not have been founded because of the Holocaust. That many of the Jews who have emigrated to Israel between the rise of Hitler to power in 1939 more than doubled the number of Jews in Palestine within 6 years and created a critical mass for state building and so on. So this kind of solidarity is something that Israel relies on, uses. One wants to use the derogatory manipulates. And you can see this very much also within the EU. There is no common EU policy towards the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. If I want to give an example, something that happened last week about the vote about the Goldstone report, right? Then Slovakia and Hungary and Italy voted against accepting the Goldstone report, and other EU countries abstained, and Britain and France were not present. So that's for the EU just last week, that common policy. Right? Palestinians also are a pan-movement. First of all, Palestinians, like Jews, have become, after 48, a diasporic nation. And they live not just inside Israel or in territories occupied by Israel. They live in several other Arab states. In one, they are a majority, Jordan. Right? They live outside of the Arab states. And in that respect, they also try to mobilize support from other states around. In this, they rely on two movements. First of all, the Pan-Arab movement. Pan-Arab movement was a secular movement that defined anyone who speaks Arabic and is part of the Arab culture, regardless of religion, as an Arab. In other words, you could be a Christian Arab, you could be an Arab Jew. Right? But it saw all Arabs as belonging to one big nationalism, and the hope was that there should be one big Arab state. Never came into being. But that was the ideals of Nasserism, of Baathism in Syria and Iraq and so on. There are many clashes between Baathism, even between Iraqi and Syrian Baathism, between Nasserism and so on. But one thing they had in common, at least the lip service, that we all unite on Palestine. So the solidarity for Palestine was a cornerstone or a fundamental axiom of pan-Arabic movement. And in that respect, Palestinians could rely on support from the Arab states. It had a negative effect as well, because feeling that all Arabs are one family, different ideologies, different Arab states fought internal Arab competition and struggles within the Palestinian movement. Each one set up organizations, each one supported, financed, trained different organizations, and helped to create this plethora of chaotic, no leadership, no unified leadership, which in the last few years has deteriorated into the schism between Hamas and Fatah. But it was always like this. So sometimes it's better to have one state than to have many states in your family. The third circle, which is on which the Palestinians tried to capitalize, and this goes back to the 1920s, was the pan-Islamic circle, much larger even than the pan-Arab. The Golden Dome in the Al-Aqsa Mosque was mainly financed through donations from Muslims in India. Today, what part of India, which are Pakistan mainly, but it was mainly financed through money from Indian Muslims, through the traveling of Haj Amin al-Husseini, the then leader of the Palestinians, all over. This means that there are now in the United Nations 57 Muslim states within the Organization of Islamic Conference. And that means that almost automatically Palestinians can rely on 57 plus others for any suggestion to criticize or denounce Israel. And that creates something which distorts also world democracy. And I must say that when I heard lately Gaddafi speaking at the UN, I had some sympathy to some of his ideas, not usually. Right? Because this is what kind of United Nations is there? I mean, there are certain powers, or have been powers in the Security Council, and there is no democracy. So it's far more complicated. I can understand this. But that led also to Israel's attitude towards the UN, that the UN is not good and can be not good for Israel. So you see, both movements have created circles of support around them which are much bigger than they are, and create so many conflicting interests and so many interventions that it's very difficult to see how you can synchronize and enmesh all the different interests towards an agreement. And of course that was not possible during the bipolar structure of the world until 89-90. And indeed, since the armistice in 1949, the Rhodes Agreement, after the first Israeli war, Israeli-Arab war, there were a lot of meetings and attempts, and very few tangible results from negotiations towards achieving peace. So if I am to concentrate on the world as it emerged after 1990, I would say that short of one peace agreement, which was achieved in 1979 between Israel and Egypt, and was a result of Egypt shifting sides from the Eastern Bloc to the Western Bloc, there were hardly any serious negotiations between Israelis and Arabs during the period of the Cold War. So most of what has happened, let's say, in the last 19 years. One more thing is that sort of between 48 to 67, Palestinians as an autonomous actor almost didn't exist. It was a petition resolution that didn't end up with a partition. One state was created, and the other state was partially swallowed up or conquered by three different other states, by Israel, by Jordan, and by Egypt. It's only after 67 that Israel controls all what used to be mandatory Palestine. And hence the whole argument between right-wing Israelis and others, is it occupied or isn't it not occupied? If it's occupied, who is it occupied from? Because it was occupied from Jordan or whatever, it may be semantic or not, but it had a meaning. And it had a meaning which I will demonstrate here, because the first point which made it possible, at least by Israel, of talking to Palestinians was the demand that the Palestinians renounce their irrecognition of Israel and renounce terrorism and so on. And Arafat was pushed around until in 1988 in Stockholm, he made, after several corrections, he made the statement that he recognizes Israel. And one of the first things that happened immediately afterwards was that Jordan announced that it renounces all claims on the West Bank. Right? It coincided also with the first insurrection, the Intifada, the first Intifada. So what happens then is that suddenly Jordan says we have no claims of the West Bank. That is after 1950, Jordan annexed the West Bank, which was part of Jordan. Now it suddenly announces that it has no claim, which makes this space suddenly vacant. It belongs to nobody. And then comes the Declaration of Independence by the Palestinians. Immediately to seize this vacuum that was created, they make a declaration. Not that the state was established because of the declaration. It was occupied by Israel in the same way as before. But that was a result that doesn't have to do with Israel. It has to do with internal Arab things. But it created now a claimant over the territory, and it made also, since the recognition of Israel, a leadership with whom Israel or the world would give legitimation to negotiate. So it created a partner to this negotiation. Since then, we had several major rounds and lesser rounds of negotiations. The world seized upon the situation after 1990, and the Madrid conference was convened, and that was the first time when Palestinians and Israelis sat together. Russia participated also in Madrid. Then there was in 1991. In 1993, the Oslo negotiations started, and they ended in a disaster 2000 in Camp David during Clinton's time. And then there were kind of the last round after Camp David failed was in Taba, in which both sides moved even a little bit more. I'll say about what they moved in a second. And then the second Intifada broke out with a lot of with suicide bombers, with heavy clamping down by the Israelis. And then 2003 was another attempt by the Quartet, Russia, the UN, the EU, and the United States, with the roadmap. And the roadmap still stands on it, was accomplished. And so if one thinks there haven't been negotiations, there have been lots of negotiations. Imagine that you're a pilot and pilots have to accumulate so many hours of flight. So the Israelis and Palestinians have thousands of hours of negotiations for it, which means that nothing that was not thought can suddenly appear. And the parameters are quite clear of what are the conditions or the sine qua nons for each side for any solution. The first thing that I want to say here is that the idea of a two-state solution is first of all implied in the petition. And then it is stated again in resolutions 242 and 338 on 67. So if you kind of wonder, I mean, can you really have two states? And nowadays there's some people who go back again to a binational state, one state solution. I mention these things not because they're so realistic, but because here in Cyprus also toy between two states, one state, and all. So they also toy between these two things, but I mean, even if you ask the one-state solutionists among Palestinians what they mean, they usually say it in the threat, rather than in the positive, that they believe that it can actually exist. And the very simple reason why it's not a realistic proposition is that for two-state solution, you need an agreement between the two sides, and you can't get it. Now you're going to get a one-state solution where there's hardly any Israeli who will agree on it. Right? And boycotting the Israelis doesn't help, because they see if you have two states, you can have a war between them and not talk. But if you're going to have one state, you have to talk a lot. So it's exactly the opposite of having a boycott. So, I mean, I with all due respect, in my personal record, I belong to such extremist left-wing groups that I support in principle the one-state solution. Only that I don't believe, like Mitchell, that it can be reached before I'm dead. Right? So I'm willing to compromise on it too, with the hope that if, after, let's say, how many years since 74 you had? After about 30 years, people do not kill each other, maybe they'll be able to talk about one state. But to move now from a situation of daily killings, see, another thing which people here always ask me when I come from Israel, what can we learn from you about reconciliation? And I say to them, what are you talking about? Right? From 74, how many people were killed here? I think the two youths who tried to cross the road. We have every day, we have people killed. So the blood is still crying, you know, so I mean, on both sides. You can't talk about reconciliation, you can't forgive. Right? So first stop the killings. There's the first condition to being able to. The elements of any two-state solutions are, first of all, borders. And the disagreements here have to do with the fact that the partition, United Nations partition, was supposed to be about 55-45, roughly, between Jews and Arabs, more to the Jews, although they were one-third of the population because of the refugees from Europe were supposed to come and so on. The war didn't end with that kind of situation, but Israel captures 79%. Right? So what we call the West Bank and Gaza today are 21% of the total of what used to be British mandate. And now the Israelis are negotiating about this. Well, the Palestinians are saying, I mean, we've made our biggest sacrifice. The fact that we're not, but in a way, it's not that they're doing it because they're good at it. Because the situation after 48 is a situation where no one can even say how it can revert. The whole physical events of the 48 resulted with escape or ethnic purging of the population, with destruction of more than 500 villages and towns. Instead, Jewish villages and towns were built, people settled there. I mean, I know that it touches on feelings that you have, but time plays a very major role here. And it becomes more and more difficult after 1, 2, 3 generations to say, I mean, who is native, who is not native after all these kind of things. So the territory and the borders are one major thing. More so, since 67, Israel started deliberate state activity, settling Jews in the newly occupied territories up to 67. And that is the main hurdle. What was more or less agreed is that the territory of the two states should be more or less the borders of before the 6 Day War. And if there are certain corrections to be made, land should be exchanged more or less on a one-to-one basis. That was Intractable. If that Palestinian state should exist, and now since 67 actually there are two parts to it, which never augurs well to the existence of the state. If you want to see, that's Bangladesh and Pakistan, although the distances were much bigger. But states should have a territory. They should not be on one side and on the other side. So the question was of a corridor or something, and calculate the land on this. So that was one aspect, the borders, the exact borders. Independence and the meaning of independence. Lately, Netanyahu said at last, for the first time, that the ruling party Likud has agreed to admit and to say that they accept the Palestinian state, but he said demilitarized, right, and conditions. And previously, things have been said about not having military alliances with others, and Israeli control over the airspace, and so on and so forth. All these things may have their justification in conditions of security, but they mean less than what most people think as sovereignty. And indeed, that was always Israel's position. And it came up for the first time during the negotiations with Egypt, because Egypt always saw itself as a patron of the Palestinians, and the negotiations of, even during Begin's time, was that Begin was willing to grant Palestinians autonomy but not statehood. And that was the resolution from 1941. And inasmuch as the Israelis stick to the resolution 181, which is the partition of Palestine, Palestinians stick to 191. And the question of, and I will say a few things about the problem of refugees. You see, from the point of view of Palestinians, the PLO is not just an organization of people who live in the West Bank or in Gaza. It regards itself very much like the Zionist organization as the representative of all the Palestinians, regardless of where they are. In Jordan, in Lebanon, and so on and so forth. Jordan is the only state which gave citizenship, because it annexed the West Bank, it's the only state which gave citizenship to the Palestinians. All the Arab states, in order to leave the question burning, and in order to make sure that they can represent the Palestinians, denied them citizenship. In Lebanon, as one of my Palestinian friends was here last year, said at a conference in another organization here in Korea, that everyone loves Palestine, but he hates the Palestinians. Right? And in that sense, Palestinians have become very much the Jews of today. A Palestinian organization that claims to represent all the Palestinians cannot, or find itself, I will not say cannot, but finds it extremely difficult to abandon part of its constituency, in the sense of saying we will resolve the problem of the West Bankers and of people in Gaza, and you go to hell. So the Palestinians find it extremely difficult to leave out of any agreement the question of refugees. It is clear we're talking nowadays about them and their offspring are now about 3.5, 4 million people. To return these people to Israel means that Israel will not have the same character of majority of Jews anymore. And therefore it's a non-starter for the Israelis. So it is known, I think, by all sides, that most of this problem will have to be solved, if there is any solution, by settling these people elsewhere. But there is a principled question. And the Arab League has made recently, in 2002, a declaration where they watered down this right to return, and they only say a just solution, to leave it more vague. So these are the things which have to be resolved, and any solution will have to deal with this. Whether Israel takes a symbolic minority, takes a little bit more, how they calculate, and so on. Now, the changes, you see, in the meantime, we had several changes which are very important. In 2005, more or less, the Intifada ended. It didn't end formally, it just petered out. It was repressed heavily and petered out. 2005 was also an Israeli decision, a unilateral decision to evacuate Gaza, the settlements in Gaza. From the point of view of most Israelis, they seem, okay, we've left Gaza, what do you want more? If you still lob us with missiles from Gaza, it means that you don't mean to live in peace even if we leave the occupied territories. Which means to the Israelis, you're still thinking of before 48 and you don't accept any resolution of the United Nations. And a lot of people say that we should leave, that the terrorism is because of our conquest of 67. What happened before 67? There was also terrorism. So, I mean, if we've gone out of Gaza and we still send missiles on us, it means that you're not accepting us in any territory in Palestine. From the point of view of the Palestinians, the Israelis have never left Gaza. What they've done, they improved their hold on Gaza, and instead of having direct control in settlements which they had to defend or so, they have taken the perimeter of Gaza, have sealed it off, besieged it, and basically nothing comes in, nothing comes out, airspace, naval, or whatever, unless we're talking about the Rafah, the border with Egypt, where they are now. It was just last week in it's a whole article about it, more than 1,500 tunnels, and they bring in through these tunnels from fuels to animals to missiles to everything that they need. It just costs more. But from point of view of Israelis, we've done our bit, we've moved out. From point of view of the Palestinians, you haven't done anything. Your control is not as before. 2006, under pressure from Bush, that we have to democratize elections to the Palestinian Authority, founded in as a result of the Oslo agreements, and a split between Hamas and Fatah. A split which deteriorates into, if you want, a civil war between them, with a lot of killing and very cruel. Again, you see, what you see here is not just two groups within the Palestinian movement. In the appearance of Hamas, you can see part of influences of different movements within the Islamic world. Hamas is an offspring of the Islamic Brotherhood, which is the main opposition in Egypt and in Jordan. Hamas now gains a lot of support from Hezbollah, from Syria. So everyone has a finger in this. Because of the siege, because of what Israel says, that you have never accepted the right of Israel to exist, because Hamas goes back on 1988, because it says, you see, 1988, the Stockholm Agreement, what Arafat says, didn't bring us anything. So why should we renounce our dreams? We don't recognize this. The only way is the armed struggle. So you have now within the Palestinian movements two, not just two groups with different policies. One which tries to make amends with the United States, with the EU, and reach some possible agreement. Another one that sticks to the old politics of only by force we can. Playing by force, I am not a purist in the sense of renouncing force because force is bad, you see. But a lot of arguments that I have with Palestinians is in that particular case of force between Israelis and Palestinians. Palestinians do not gain. At most, they gain the position of an underdog. Yes, they do. Position of an underdog. They may gain, because Israel overplayed its hand, they may gain some delegitimation of the Israeli army and the Israeli state. And the Goldstone report is a case at hand. But on the whole, and a lot of Palestinians will agree with me, especially people in the universities or one, that the armed struggle has caused the Palestinians much more harm than good. Because through the use of armed struggle, they created justification for Israel to use its much superior power and inflict on them much heavier losses of it. It becomes, in this cycle of blood and retaliation or one, it becomes, everyone forgets who fired the first shot. It becomes a cycle of you killed, I killed, and no one, really, even experts, can follow anymore who started and who's in this round, who started and who not. Right? So it becomes a way in which this allows the other to use the force which it has much more. And what happened is, this is what happened in December 2008, what's the operation that is called molten lead. Molten lead, the Israelis claim, was the right of self-defense. Because indeed, for years, there was a barrage almost daily of missiles, not many killed, but it was a psychological warfare. Sometimes people killed, the houses ruined. The Israeli public, like American public, like the British public, like the EU in Afghanistan, and so on, is very careful about all the caskets with the dead, all the plastic bags coming with the dead. And the war has become disproportionate. The high capital warfare which we have today is that in order to save lives on your side, you shoot from afar. You use technologies to shoot more accurately than in the past from afar. But the technologies are not that accurate. And a lot of, this is what is called collateral damage. I like all these legal kind of concepts. Children, citizens, women, all kinds of people are killed. This is true, by the way, not just about Israel. It's true about what the United States did in Iraq, what the United States does in Afghanistan. It's true about what the EU forces are doing in Afghanistan. It's true about every modern warfare. So there is a real problem about definition of international law of war when the war has changed completely. War has become asymmetrical. Most of the wars conducted nowadays are not wars between two armies, but in most wars you have an army against what we call non-combatants. And as we know from revolutionary warfare and guerrilla warfare since Mao Zedong, the guerrilla should be like the fish in water. Right? We don't fight anymore like in the Napoleonic Wars where we're dressed in blue and they're in red, and we face each other and we take aim and we kind of kill rows after rows of people. We started with khaki and have camouflage. And one of the best camouflages is where you can't tell who is the soldier and who is the citizen. So, and the Goldstone report actually said that sort of war crimes were committed by both sides because the Hamas used civilians or civilian places to hide arms and so on. To the Israelis, what I say is that the commanders got a very simple kind of command. Don't risk soldiers. If you come to a house, you first aim, you send a shell from a tank, and then when you see that there is no movement afterwards, you go in and you find children killed. And that's what happened. And that's what happens, by the way, in Afghanistan all the time and in Iraq and so on. So there is an impossible situation which the world will have to address. Now, this is the situation that Obama, I want to round up, you see, just to say a few things about Obama. Enters Obama, right? The Gaza thing happened in the interim period until he was inaugurated. The day before he was inaugurated, there was a stop. So it was kind of the no-ruler kind of thing between Bush and Obama. The Israelis did their thing. Now Obama comes in, and as I said at the beginning, Obama cannot act anymore like Bush. There is a limit even to the United States, both with the economic thing, with the unilateralism of the United States. The Israelis have copied the unilateralism from the United States, and they behave what the United States can do in the world, we can do in the region. And suddenly the world is changing, because Obama, whether by inclination, and I believe that he really has a different predisposition than Bush, or whether it is because of his the restriction on the power of the United States, has to take a different route. And what we see is that he doesn't think anymore in resolving a problem by tackling it on the spot. He shows a capability of system thinking, or much wider implications of who aids and who abets with this situation, and therefore if I hit this one, I did not resolve the sources of where the others are coming, and I have to look at the wider picture. The second thing is that he cannot continue with unilateralism, and he's moving into multilateralism. I think that was one of the reasons why he got the Nobel Prize, with this intention. No, I mean, in that sense, he's already done something. It's not something a promise, but he's already done something. The third thing is that he's taking a much more indirect approach rather than direct approach. In the Israeli-Arab conflict, one of the things which I see, I hope that it lasts, right, and that Obama is trying to do, is to understand that in order to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, he has to resolve a lot of other conflicts which stand on the way. For example, with Iran, he has to get the support of Russia to have a resolution for sanctions in the Security Council. And he will not get this if he puts along the Bush doctrine, if he puts strong raiders on the borders of Russia. So, lo and behold, he thinks, and he says, we'll not put these things there. And with Iran, we're not bomb them, we'll negotiate with them. But while we negotiate, things happen. And I don't know, I don't have enough knowledge to what extent there is an American finger in all the Ahmadinejad, the protests or whatever. I should hope that there is, that he has this capacity, right? But things happen, right? And through coming to some agreements with Russia, suddenly a possibility that you will transfer your enriched uranium to Russia becomes possible. The same thing with other components of the Israeli-Arab conflict, because some of the problems which I indicated before, elements of solution, like security, like the question of recognition, like the question of refugees, the solution may not be only with the Palestinians. The solution lies also with other Arab countries. If we don't want Hamas to be able to operate from Damascus, if you don't want Iran to supply Hamas with arms, you have to tackle it at source. In other words, you have to negotiate with Syria, you have to negotiate with Iran. So the negotiating with Iran is not just about the question of of enriching. It has to do with resolving the relationship of Iran's attitude towards its place within the Middle East. Within the Middle East, the EU, the Quartet, or what, want to change. Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is part of the solution. The building of the Palestinian state demands, or the Gulf states, demands a lot of investment. Demands relations between the Arab, closing the circle of the Arab-Israeli conflict, not just the Palestinian conflict. Syria is part of this solution. So there is much more now with Syria, Saudi Arabia, Iran, or what, which all can come together. Because I don't have time. What I want to say is just this. I'm watching with great hopes what Obama is trying to do. But I can say and finish with this. His plans are admirable, but they are very complex. And they are very difficult to synchronize. Whether he'll be able to bring all the pieces of the puzzle together before zero time is questionable. I just hope that the next eruption does not happen before that. And that's the problem I have. It's not that I don't support him. I can see what he's trying to do. And if he will succeed, what he will bring about is not just peace between Israel and Palestinians, but a much wider solution to the whole question of the Middle East. Can he do it? Does he have the time? Does he have a second 4 years after this? It depends on so many other variables that it's very difficult. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Avi. As usual, you've stimulated our thinking and given us lots of